only time we have a party out there. I think Phil wanted to remind you about something here.
If you all want to testify after the applicant gets done with their witnesses, we may not get to it tonight, but we took lists of your signatures on Tuesday, and we're going to take them tonight. There's an area over here where you can sign up whether or not you're a supporter or if you're an objector or if you want to be a neutral party. But in any case, if you want to speak, you can sign up over here. And if you signed up on Tuesday, we still have your name. You don't have to sign up again.
Okay. I think we're going to move on to the next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next witness is Andrea Giampoli, and she's going to testify concerning environmental issues. She has a PowerPoint that goes along with her testimony, so hopefully that can be put up on the screen.
You just solemnly swear that the testimony to give in this case now in the hearing be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Help you God.
I do.
You have her name.
Andrea Giampoli.
Better state your name and address for the record.
Andrea Giampoli, and my business.
You're going to have to get real close to that line.
Sorry about that.
That's all.
1 South Wacker, Suite 1800, Chicago, Illinois, 60606.
Mr. Chairman, if she has the PowerPoint available beforehand, like the last witness did, that was quite helpful. We have that handed out beforehand. Oh, okay.
I apologize.
So we got to turn around. Pardon our backs, everybody.
Sorry about that.
You got everything. Go ahead.
Good evening, board. You can actually move to the next slide here. Again, my name is Andrea Giampoli, and I am the Environmental and Wildlife Permitting Manager at Invenergy. I've been with Invenergy for 3 years, and I've worked on this project since its beginning when we began to do environmental surveys on it in 2016. So I just wanted to walk through the environmental surveys that we've done in the project and walk you through the process that we follow to do those. And then I'll also go through the results that we have, which are also available in our application. All of the full reports that were issued by our consultants that prepared the work are all available in the application as well. So further details are available there. And I just want to start by saying that this isn't the first project that we developed in Illinois. It's not the first time that we've communicated with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources or the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. We have a long history of working with them in coordination on 9 or 10 projects here in Illinois. And we've done a lot of great conservation work in Illinois as well. And so I just wanted to highlight that to start, to just kind of set the stage that we have this ongoing relationship with the agency staff here in the state. And that is kind of the basis for the relationship we built on about this project specifically. So this is just a list of the conservation and research projects that we've done in the last few years here. We have the Black Ball Mine Indiana Bat Migration Study that we've done. As you can see, these studies have been done throughout the state in LaSalle County, McLean County, Henry County. We've done a lot of bat deterrent research in my position, I'm really trying to make sure that our projects have completely minimized their impacts to wildlife and to natural resources. And so we are constantly at the forefront of really trying to understand what can we do in our industry to push the ball even farther and improve the technology so that we're not just relying on siting of our turbines away from natural resources, but we can also employ operational strategies and potentially these new innovative technologies such as deterrents to deter bats from the turbines. And so we've been involved in studying bats as well as eagles in the state. In LaSalle County, we've tagged 4 bald eagles with telemetry packets, and so we are tracking their movements throughout the state and near to one of our other operating facilities in LaSalle County. so we can understand the interaction with eagles and how they fly near wind turbines. Because if we can better understand that, then maybe we can more responsibly site turbines in the future. So we really want to promote a clean energy future that's also compatible with wildlife, all the wildlife that we love so much, and all the natural resources that we have here in the state. So I just wanted to highlight that to start. We can move to the next slide. Next slide. So when we go out to figure out where we are going to build the newest, our next wind facility, we follow this a tiered approach, and we thought that tiered approach is one that's been recommended by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. They've actually developed a document that outlines this tiered approach, and it's called the Land-Based Wind Energy Guidelines. And so it offers this approach to basically assessing a project from very early on when we're trying to figure out where should we build that project, to studying the actual project area itself, to then later after the project is built, studying as impacts to the wildlife, comparing the studies that we've done in pre-construction, in our assessments before the project is built. We're trying to figure out what impacts we maybe have, and then after the project's built, we look at those impacts and we see where we close, where we right. Is there anything we should do in operation that can affect or change? Basically, if we had more impact than we were anticipating, what can we do to bring that back to what we were anticipating? And so it's this stepwise approach to assessing the project, and that continues on through the whole entire operation of the project, through the decommissioning, and it involves onto Tier 5, basically continuing research, which is kind of what I kicked off with, is some of the ongoing research that we have as well. So we follow these tiers, and Tier 1 is basically, like I said, the preliminary site evaluation, and you'll see, I'm going to walk through the tiers that we followed on this specific project. In particular is Tier 2 and Tier 3 that we followed so far during our pre-construction surveys. We also have followed the United States Fish and Wildlife Service Eagle Conservation Plan Guidance, which is another document that was published by the Fish and Wildlife Service that outlines the methodology and protocols that it recommends that we follow to study the impacts, potential impacts to eagles. And so we followed the approach that the Fish and Wildlife Service has recommended, and we've worked closely with the local field office in doing so. So I'm going to move to the next slide. So that's a good segue into the agency consultation that's been conducted on this project. So with the Fish and Wildlife Service, we've had 3 different consultation meetings. The earliest was held in March of 2016. We also met with them in February 2017 and again in October 2017. So in these first meetings, the one that was held in March 2016, we discussed basically the methodologies that we were planning on following and conducting the research. That was at the very beginning of when we started to study wildlife on site and started to look at the natural resources in the project area. And so we basically go to the Fish and Wildlife Service office and we say, this is the protocol we're planning on following. Do you have any feedback on that? Is there anything that we should change? But generally, we, because we have this long-standing relationship with them, we've been through this before. Typically, and because we're following the wind energy guidelines, that's a document that where they set forth all their recommendations. We're typically in line with one another, and they see, where exactly we're looking to build, and they can make recommendations about things we should be thinking about, specific species we should be thinking about, and then we basically move forward. We conduct the surveys, and then we meet with them again at the tail end of the first year, and we say, here's the results, here's what we found in those surveys. And then if there's anything that seems surprising, or was there anything that we weren't anticipating, should we be thinking about doing any additional surveys? Are there any species we weren't anticipating that maybe we should look into that species further? That's when we have those conversations and we figure out whether or not anything additional needs to be done. And then we kind of continue that conversation as the project continues. reviewing the results. Discussion, we actually still have some large bird avian use surveys that are ongoing. It's our protocol to conduct 2 years of pre-construction avian use surveys as recommended by the Fish and Wildlife Service in the Eagle Conservation Plan guidance. Because it sets us up to have all the data that we would need to make a determination about whether there's eagle risk at the site, and if there was, then we would have the data we would need to move forward with potentially a permit process. And then we also followed completed the consultation with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. That process is different in that we submit the EcoCat request that they have. We basically submit information about the project area, the project area map, and then the DNR responds with recommendations that they have about the project. Those recommendations actually go to the county, and then we have the opportunity to respond on our behalf, and we've done that. You can move to the next slide. So this is an overview of the natural resource and wildlife surveys that we've done for the project, starting as early as March 2016. The WEG tier, that's a wind energy guidelines tier that it corresponds to, so the tier 1 and 2 surveys, the very preliminary, looking at which area in the state, which area, in the country, where should we be building, where does it look like we're going to have a very low impact. We start with that very preliminary site assessment, and then the site characterization is looking more in detail in that project area itself. What resources do we have in the project area? The site characterization full report is in the application if you want to look into more detail of what protected areas do we have in site, what potential species do we have on site, and that's all included in that document and in that assessment. Then we have the Tier 3 surveys that have been conducted, the raptor nest survey, where we're looking for raptor and other large bird nests, such as eagle nests. We conducted those surveys both in spring of 2016 and spring of 2017. We conducted a small bird use survey, so we're looking for small passerines. That survey was conducted in March of 2016 through November of 2016. It's a monthly survey. We also conducted large bird use surveys, so in those we're looking more for waterfowl and large raptors and eagles, and that's the survey that I mentioned has been conducted here for almost 2 years now. And then the Tier 3 bat acoustic survey, where we're looking at bat activity, and that was conducted through the full bat active season in 2016. You can go to the next slide. Just generally, this is kind of one part of the site characterization is looking at the different land cover types in the project area. As you can see from the image here, the brown is cultivated cropland. So, this really is a largely cultivated cropped, previously disturbed project area. And that's why it was attractive to us, especially those on my team, the environmental team. We really like a site that is pre-disturbed so that we're not impacting, pristine wildlife, or we're not impacting sensitive species, because really it's my goal to make sure that we're not having impacts to sensitive species, especially those that are state and federally threatened as protected. Threatened and endangered, sorry about that. So as you can see, it's largely cultivated, it was attracted to us, and we can move on to the next slide here. So this shows the results from our raptor nest survey. So just really quickly, the methods that we follow on the raptor nest survey, we actually hire a plane, and we put a biologist in a plane, and they fly all of the suitable habitat out to 10 miles beyond our project boundary. So we're not just looking in the project boundary itself, because we know that eagles and large raptors, they fly beyond that. And so we look out to 10 miles. This image here, just so you can see it a little bit more clearly, is limited to our 2-mile buffer. So we actually search for all eagle nests out to 10 miles. We look for all raptor nests, including eagle nests, out to 2 miles, including the project area. So you can see here, we surveyed the project both in 2016, and then we checked again in 2017 because we want to see what kind of changes are being made. Are there a bunch of new nests in a year that we should be aware of? We don't just look once, but we want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on those nests, and if they're occupied or they're no longer occupied, that we keep record of that. And so we found 24 nests total in both years. There were 10 raptor nests within the current project boundary, only 3 of which are actually active nests. And so they actually saw that they were being incubated by birds. And this study is conducted in the nesting season, and it's also before leaf out, so basically we can more easily see into the trees if there are nests there. So that's why that's conducted in March and early April. There was 1 bald eagle nest found in our surveys, and it was 4 miles outside of the current project boundary. You can't see it on this map, but it's basically directly west of the project area. Next slide. This image just gives you an idea of how comprehensively we cover the project area with our AD&U surveys. So what you're seeing there is basically each 800-meter radius plot in which we, if you can imagine, we put a biologist in the middle of each one of those circles, and we limit their view shed out to 800 meters because that's basically about as far as they can see. And they stand at the center of each one of those circles 1 time per month for 60 minutes. So what they're doing during that 60 minutes is counting how many large birds that they're seeing fly by. And so they're keeping track of all the species that they're seeing and for how long they're seeing them, how many different observations, how many flocks. And so they're spending a lot of time out there. I don't want to confuse you, so I was just mentioning the large bird use surveys. Up here we have the small bird use surveys. Those are conducted in the same circles, but actually the view shed is smaller because the birds are smaller. So those, the biologist stands at the center of each one of those circles, but only looks out 100 meters. And they record everything that they see and hear. So it can be things that they hear beyond 100 meters, but we limit it because the small birds can't be heard as far. And then we limit those to also 8-minute surveys because we hear so many in that time. We get a really good idea of species composition by limiting those surveys to 8 minutes. And those are conducted 14 times a year so that we can actually conduct more in migratory periods when we have more species out to make sure that we're getting a very complete list of what species are in the project area. So for the small bird use surveys, we were standing out in the middle of those plots for 67.2 total hours, just collecting bird data. And then for the large bird use surveys, which like I mentioned, those are conducted monthly for an hour. Over the course of, since March 2016, we've counted, or basically been out there observing for 903 hours. So it's a lot of time spent in the neighborhood looking up at the skies, and so we have a pretty good idea of the species composition of both small and large birds in the project area. And we also, we separate it out. We have, all the plots are very well distributed throughout the project area. They actually cover 30% of the total project area, which is one of the recommendations under the Eagle Conservation Plan guidance. But also lets us, really gives us a good idea of both spatial and temporal use of birds in the project area. So if we are seeing, in one particular area that there's a certain species, sensitive species that hangs out a lot, then we can think about that and siting the project. Maybe we site our turbines away from that area where we're seeing a lot of sensitive species. We can move to the next slide. So this is just quick survey results. These are again in the application, but for anyone that's interested, we saw 46 different species of small birds, the most common species being the European starling. We did not see any federally protected small bird species. We did see one state endangered species, but that species was actually observed now in a location that is 5 miles east of the nearest participating parcel. And there was only one observation in July, so the project is being sited away from where that observation was. Next slide. These are the results of the large bird view surveys. We saw in year 1, 41 different large bird species. In year 2, 35 different species. You can see the most common species listed here. We did have 14 observations of bald eagles in the project area. Like I said, that was over the course of 900 hours, but it's been helpful to see kind of where we see those bald eagles flying around, and we can think about that in the siting of the project. And then we also saw 3 state-listed species, the upland sandpiper, the northern harrier, and the short-eared owl. Move to the next slide. And we also conducted a bat acoustic survey. So generally the objective of our bat acoustic surveys is to understand basically the seasonality of when bats are on the landscape, so that if we do need to employ, or we decide to employ a curtailment strategy, we have a good idea of when bats are coming onto the landscape and at what time of year they're leaving the landscape, and when they're most active, and what type of habitat that they're most active. So we have an acoustic detector that we put in forested habitat, so a very suitable habitat for bats in the summer, because they generally stay within forested areas. And then we put one in a field of a Met Tower, so that it's more similar to where we would have a turbine. It's more in the middle of, it's farther from the suitable habitat. So we see different activity peaks in the different types of habitat. So in the fall, the activity peaks at the Met Towers, because that's during the bat migration. So they're actually flying over the landscape, and they're not staying so much in the forested areas like they do in the summer. So in the summer, that's why you see more activity there in the forested areas. So out of the 24,000 plus passes that we recorded, just 12 of them are identified as myotis, which is basically in the state and federally protected bat species are both myotis species. And so that's why we call out that type of species, to really understand, do we have protected bat species in the project area? Should we be concerned about that? Do we have a lot of forested area in the project area? In some projects we have more habitat, and so we need to really be thinking about what we should be doing for bats, both in the summer and in the fall. And 95% of the passes were reported at the forest detector. So we're seeing a lot of activity in the forested area, but not as much in the middle of the fields throughout the year. Next slide. So I just want to, some of the habitat setbacks that we've applied in this project include the 1,000-foot setback from what we've identified as suitable foraging and roosting habitat for bats. And that's the bat summer habitat. We make sure that we set back from that, so we're minimizing our impacts to bats. And then we also applied a 1,000-foot setback from active raptor nests that we identified in the project area. So that we're really setting back and minimizing our impacts to both raptors and bats with those setbacks. So that really concludes my slides. But generally speaking, the project area, we selected it because it was mostly previously disturbed cropland. We found very little insensitive natural habitat in the project area, and so we're pleased to be and hope to be building in this area.
Director. Questions for the board?
You mentioned the different types of bats. You had 24,000 passes, and one was the particular relatively rare species.
No, I said that there were 12 within the genus Myotis, and there are actually several species that are in the genus Myotis, which include bats that are not protected, but the two bats that are protected are also Myotis. So we look at that, but it doesn't tell us necessarily that they are protected, that those Myotis species that we saw in the project area were the northern long-eared bat or the Indiana bat, which are the two protected species. There are species such as the little brown bat, which are Myotis, that are not protected, but because they fall under that genus, we look specifically at that.
Are you distinguishing these with the acoustics?
With the acoustic software, yes.
So you can tell one bat from another by the acoustics?
They can tell it down to the genus, yes.
How far away from, you suggested 1,000-foot margin away from the habitat. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so that would be essentially avoiding a lot of the habitat is largely linked to the creek, the Mackinac River, and the creek, the Tenney Creeks.
Correct, yeah. The Fish and Wildlife Service has the Indiana Bat Summer Survey guidelines in which they define suitable summer habitat for the Indiana bat, which is very similar to the northern long-eared bat, which are both protected species. And so we follow that definition. It's a specific type of, it's treat areas, riparian corridors, areas where the spots you can easily find insects. There's a certain definition on a certain number of trees, a certain width for the bats to kind of crawl up under during the day. So we basically map throughout the project area all potential suitable summer habitat for bats, and then we apply a 1,000-foot setback from that habitat. And yes, it includes a lot of the riparian corridors, creeks, especially the creeks with vegetation, because those all fall under that suitable bat habitat definition.
On the raptors, can you consult with the people who do the annual raptor survey in McLean County? To get the census of the raptors?
In the site characterization survey, we access a lot of different databases, public databases. So they're accessing, I can't recall if they've accessed specifically McLean County raptor results. I'm not sure which group you're talking about specifically, but they do try to access as much of the publicly available raptor data as they can, specific to local groups and Audubon groups, Christmas counts and local bird counts and hawk watches and whatever data they can collect from the county.
With as many projects as Energy has had, what type of issues have you found as far as interaction between having the wind turbines and these species that you just studied?
I guess specifically what kind of issues are you, I guess, could you repeat?
Well, do they tend to get killed a lot, or do they? Does it disrupt their nesting?
The species that I'm that I look at most closely are bats and birds, especially state protected, protected birds and eagles. And we are doing everything we can to minimize our impacts to birds and bats. But there are, just by the nature of operating, wind turbines do cause mortality of birds and bats, and so. But what my job is to minimize those impacts to the greatest extent possible, and that's what we're trying to do here.
So even with the 1,000-foot setbacks, what would be head count, if you will. Like what are the impacts? I mean, there's got to be statistics out there for utilizing a 1,000-foot setback for bats and other birds of prey, and any type of bird. What would be, and head count is a terrible word to use maybe, but what is the impact there in real numbers? Do you have that?
I don't have statistics on the impacts or the effects of that setback. That setback has really been accepted as an industry standard. It comes out of Fish and Wildlife Service guidelines, definition of habitat, and basically how far out bats are going to fly from their protected covered foraging area. And so it would be difficult to conduct a study to really understand that would be a difficult study to conduct, and I haven't seen it done. So I'm not aware of the statistics. I will bring up is just some of the additional practices that we have and making sure we're minimizing impacts. Some of the best management practices that we have include, the eagles are typically attracted to project areas, especially during the winter time, to carcasses, and they feed on roadkill and carcass dumps and things like that. So even when we're looking originally at our project areas and the location of them, we're making sure we're aware of where those are, and we're also aware of those practices. We do try to work with landowners and improving those practices and dumping practices so that we're minimizing the attraction of eagles in the project area as well.
I'd like to discuss your response to the IDNR's recommendations. Are you prepared to do that?
Sure.
Have you been involved in that?
Yes.
Okay. Probably the best way to go through would be for you to say, what your response is to each one of their recommendations and why it is. So recommendation number 1, you agree to that if we, which is slowing it. I have to read. Slowing the turbine speeds down essentially during the high bat activity time, July 15th through October 15th.
Yeah, the DNR recommended curtailing turbine operations below wind speeds of 5.0 meters per second during the period of July 15th, October 15th, which is the bat migratory season. And yes, we agreed to do that.
Okay. And then on the imposing a requirement, they're recommending that we impose a requirement that you conduct 3 years of mortality monitoring to quantify bird and bat mortality. And you guys have agreed to 1 year because in your experience you found it similar to the first year. Can you talk about some of that experience and the number of experiences you had there and why you think it would be the same? Instinctively, I would think migratory, I know birds are very habitual,
right.
But I would think that some years there would be more than others, given the year.
Right. It used to be that that the standard was conducting the full 3 years, but because there was such similarity in the 3 years, and also just so much, across the industry, so many companies conducting the data, that we do have a really good idea, generally speaking, what the impacts are going to be. And so, it didn't make sense to continue to collect the data, to spend the money collecting the data, just to collect it, just to kind of confirm the data that we already had. And instead, reallocate those funds towards other, research or to conservation. And so that's why, the industry's kind of moved back toward doing 1 year and trying to look at, reallocating those funds to other resources.
And this is because wind farms have been around a lot longer now. We feel like we have more data to compare the one-year collection that you would have as to whether that's high, low.
Correct, and then we also train all of our operations staff members. So those are actually working on the ground, technicians that are working on the turbines every day in wildlife detection and reporting. And so they basically will report to us any carcass that they see at any time, so that it's immediately reported to us within 24 hours to us internally, to my team, and then it's my job immediately to make sure that we are IDing that carcass so that we're aware of whether or not it's a protected species or not, and that's all recorded. And if it is a protected species, then we also report that to the Fish and Wildlife Service or the DNR, depending on which entity it's protected by.
Is this also how you would, if migratory patterns were to change? So I assume they're not stagnant, and if migratory patterns were to change, and this wind farm did impact that, how would we know that?
Right, exactly. So when we have these reports coming in, then we know that if there's, if we're seeing kind of just every once in a while we're getting a report, that's kind of the norm. If we get, we're starting to get more reports, or we see kind of a large, we see more than one carcass of the same turbine, then we know that there's something that's different there, and that's when we'll go in and investigate that.
So how many reports have you received from the wind turbines? You've trained the staff, they're supposed to report, and how many reports have you actually received?
I actually don't know that off the top of my head. We have a large fleet, and so I'm receiving reports across the fleet. I also divide the division of labor between me and my colleagues who cover our operating fleet, so I couldn't give you kind of an accurate number of how many reports are coming in nationwide or anything like that. So the number would be somewhat arbitrary, but probably to you, because it would just be those projects that I'm working on. And they're coming in, I can't say exactly how regularly, but not that regularly.
Okay, and then recommendation number 3 is that we consider imposing a requirement for you to perform and report fish and mussel surveys of 100 meters up and downstream, and you guys don't agree with that.
Well, that one we just found would be something that would be covered under the jurisdiction of the Army Corps of Engineer if we were if we were actually going to impact a stream, that would be covered under conditions that we would have in any permitting with them. We also have the stormwater pollution prevention plan that has erosion control measures that we also follow. So we just didn't think that an additional requirement was necessary. This requirement has also been, recommendation has also been made by the DNR in the last few years on wind facilities, and to our knowledge, I don't know how often they're the county further recommends them to the applicant.
So their thought behind recommending this, I would assume, would be because you are disturbing the land, and I know you have conservation and erosion guidelines, but would you assume that they're recommending this so they can make sure that those are good enough to not impact these mussels and things?
I guess assume that would be their, I'm not going to, I guess assume what their reasoning is.
I just wanted to make sure I was being logical there.
Right.
All right. And then the same thing for tracking surveys for mud puppy salamander. And I think that you're, go ahead and explain your reasoning there.
Yeah, we're just not aware of any publicly available scientific data that supports that wind turbines themselves in their operation have any effect on salamanders. So that's not a species that that we believe that we need to look any further into.
I assume that wind turbines species before. And here you guys say that you aren't aware of any, that it impacts aquatic species. Are you aware of how many studies have been done, or what do you base this on?
No, we're not aware of any studies that have been done.
Okay, and then number 5 is that the department recommends the county consider imposing a requirement for the applicant to avoid siting turbines within 500 feet of a perennial stream. And you state that you don't believe this recommendation is necessary. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Correct. I mean, if you mapped all the perennial streams throughout the project area according to the National Hydrology Database, there's some 49 miles of perennial streams throughout the project area. I think that if we actually, put a 500-foot setback from those streams, the question would be what would we be achieving from that? And we've applied a setback from, the high quality stream areas that have vegetation, as those are falling under the suitable bat habitat, which is basically riparian corridors with vegetation. And so we find that our setback from that habitat is sufficient to kind of cover the goal of what is trying to be achieved here.
Okay, and then number 6 is, did anyone have any questions on that?
I do on number 5. To what extent do bats follow the perennial streams, because you have riparian areas that have greater vegetation in them that might attract the species, typically mosquitoes, that bats would feed them? To what extent do bats track the perennial streams?
As long as there's some sort of vegetation cover, it'll typically fall under that definition of suitable foraging habitat. And if it's completely open without any cover, then it might not fall under that definition.
So the streams that are, what's the phrase here? That a perennial stream, so the perennial stream has habitat, riparian habitat, and so it would be probably more likely habitat for bats. And so you're saying it doesn't believe that, you're saying MWFEC does not believe that recommendation is necessary to keep turbines away from this, what is essentially bat habitat area. So I'm trying to figure out what's going on there.
No, we've applied the 1,000-foot setbacks from the riparian corridors with the vegetation, which may encompass some of these perennial streams, the higher quality perennial streams that have the vegetation cover. Another point that we make here that is basically a lot of the perennial streams in the project area we believe have been kind of modified for agricultural purposes. And so, like I said, what would we be achieving by setting back from them? What are we looking to avoid?
Keep going on back to question number 3. We can do that right now. So you're familiar with the Mackinac River. I believe it's on the Illinois Natural Areas Inventory by having a rich number of species of fish and mussels and other things there.
Correct.
So your recommendation is that they don't do fish and mussel surveys after they disturb the water. So they go muddy up the water and they have a whole bunch of dirt going up and down, changing the habitat along the river. But you're recommending that that doesn't impact aquatic species?
We've applied
So we would know that they're disturbed by the number of fish and mussel species that are in those particular areas.
If I may respond, Kevin Parton, you were mentioning the Mackinac River and the stream. We are not going to be building in that area. In other words, I think it has to be clear as to where we're building and what we are disturbing, or for that matter, not disturbing. So would you explain that we are not building or will not disturb the Mackinac River?
So the DNR, so you have essentially no problem with DNR recommendation that if you're not going to disturb it, then you could say, sure, we don't have any problems, have a requirement that you perform fish and mussel surveys when you disturb it. If you disturb it, there's no survey.
It depends on this would be any stream out in the middle of an agricultural field, not necessarily the rich, species-rich areas of the Mackinac River or that.
So none of the underground tubes with all of the electrical conduits will be going across anything relating to the Mackinac.
That's correct. Where our project is north of the Mackinac.
And sufficiently away from the Mackinac that none of the disturbances on the waterways would flow and would have that disturbance on the Mackinac.
That's correct. And just one other point, you were mentioning the underground cables. Anytime we would be taking underground cables, even to streams in the middle of a project or creeks, we will directionally bore, so we will not disturb the stream bed. Even a small, insignificant stream, we will directionally bore under those.
All right.
And then the sixth one is that they recommend that no wind turbines are sited within 1/2 mile of the Mackinac River Land and Water Reserve, which we talked about. You said, Gary, that you're not disturbing that. And you said that 115 of 117 turbines are more than 1/2 mile. Is this correct? So there's 2 that are within 1/2 mile?
Correct. Correct. In our response, we said that, the board makes a recommendation that we don't have any within 1/2 mile that we would consider that.
And then the final one is regarding the Franklin ground squirrel and performing tracking surveys. And your response to that one?
Just that, the DNR had noted that the species not within the project area, and we're also just not publicly aware of any publicly available scientific data that would suggest that shadow flicker would impact the species, especially given that it spends more than half of the year underground.
So you're saying that one spends a lot of time underground and you don't think the shadow flicker, and the reason they would want that study is for the shadow flicker, to see if there's a shadow flicker.
Correct.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Is there any other questions from the board? About staff?
Yes, in number 3, you indicated that there may be conditions required by the Army Corps of Engineers. Have you received any conditions from the Army Corps of Engineers?
We have not received any recommendations. None of the turbines that we would be installing would disturb any streams. The potential that could happen is if we were to locate an access road that would require, say, a culvert through a stream. That would be a requirement that we would then go to the Army Corps and look for any approvals. However, if there's a minimal disturbance, there is a nationwide permit that allows a culvert to be put into a stream.
Okay, at this time we can have questions from the audience. You want to come forward, state your name and address.
Good evening, Glenn Schwass, 27709 North, 2550 East Road, Lexington. Thank you. You good? So it's been a long night. I think you stated earlier in the statements in energy. Could you consider yourself on the cutting edge of environmental studies, and that you do a thorough and quick study of the environment?
I would.
So my question then is this, and I heard a lot about fish and the wildlife environment And it was a question that I posed back in the gentleman before you on the studies of leisure animals. So I didn't hear or see anything or no discussion of horses, cattle, swine, poultry, and/or family animals. So how does it impact these turbines? Again, I'll ask, how does it impact all these animals, or have you ever studied those animals, behaviors and reactions to those powers and movement?
In our discussions with the Fish and Wildlife Service and DNR, we are investigating any species, any information that they provide, not just on avian species, but as well as ground species. The experience, though, we have had through our installation of projects to date, as well as our competitors and others across the country, there has not been impacts that we have seen to these various animals, and that they're compatible, that the wind turbines are operating in a variety of environments, both farmlands and other grasslands, etc., is compatible with the existing species. And in addition to that, there's no published data, peer-reviewed data indicating that there's a correlation between the tens of thousands of wind turbines that have been installed across the country and the world and any impacts on these species.
So you would be opposed to studying those species because of the impact of them. I mean, I look at horses and/or family pets, dogs, cats, seem to be very thin, eat things like that, and they're very conscious of their surroundings. So the question is, if you're that thorough, why would you be studying those issues?
Because we are studying them with our existing wind farms on an ongoing basis. We have anecdotal evidence with these tens of thousands of turbines that there is no impact. In other words, we are not seeing people coming to us saying we are having problems with this species. So there isn't a need to investigate further because there's no evidence of a problem.
So if somebody did come to you with an issue like that, how would you address it?
We would investigate. We would follow a protocol where we would investigate: is that pervasive throughout the area? We would go down that path of studying it. Yes.
So okay, so you're a large company. I'm a small landowner. What would be my percentage of success if I came to you with a problem like that we had seen in an animal? What would be my percentage of success in getting some kind of resolution to that in a timely manner?
Well, you're putting a very wide open hypothetical out there, but as a large owner of and operator of wind turbines, our goal is to make sure that our turbines have minimal impact to the community, and if there's a problem, we fix it because we want to make sure that the community is satisfied. Now, what that takes, what you would be required to satisfy, it's a hypothetical. I couldn't even say what problems you would have. I mean, if you want to give me something specific that you have seen happen in the past, I'd be happy to investigate.
Yeah, I don't have turbines all over my property.
But I would say the history is.
They're going to react to that somehow.
But the history is tens of thousands of turbines across the country. There is no problem.
So corrective action would be obtainable.
That's correct.
So another question you stated in there. Well, let me back up. Have you done any seismic studies in this property or this land that's around these turbines that are being presented?
From a structural perspective,
The seismic studies of the ground.
We have structural engineers who design our foundations, and the turbines are designed structurally to resist. Generally, in this kind of environment, the wind load is going to be higher than any seismic impacts.
Okay, so I asked that question because of the comment that you made earlier, and that is that your directional bore under these waterways or such, how would you know that you're not impacting the ground if you don't have any type of a seismic study or something there? Because when you directional bore, you're disturbing the ground.
I'm sorry, I don't understand how you relate earthquake issues with directional boring.
I'm not talking earthquake issues.
Well, that's what seismic is.
Well, the seismic studies the ground to see what's around, the stability of your ground, your different levels of the soil, rock, all that other stuff.
No, I'm sorry, seismic is earthquake.
Okay, so then, well, okay, X-ray the ground. I don't know the technical term, but you're looking at the ground, you're looking at the environment, you said directional boring doesn't disturb it. I
Well-
the question would be, how would directional boring not disturb?
No,
the ground?
I'm saying the directional bore comment was with respect to creeks that we directionally bore under so that we do not trench through the creek bed.
Okay. So, and your directional boring, 34,000, your count is 34.5, it's 34,500 volts underground. Does that not mitigate some type of a harmonic that could disrupt the fish or the wildlife or the mussels in that water?
It does not.
So how does it not? I mean, it's putting out that type of.
It's a grounded, three cable grounded system, heavily insulated, both by the insulation around the cable itself and the surrounding soil that it's in. And it mitigates, and any electromagnetic dissipates very, very quickly beyond that.
But it does, it did out beyond the cable.
Yes, it would,
So
yes.
it could impact that fish and mussel.
There is no evidence that it does.
Are the turbines, do they have oil in them?
The gearboxes do have oil in them, yes.
Have you ever experienced the leak of the oil?
I don't have any information on that. I can't say one way or the other. It's possible.
Okay, so if the oil leaks, it gets to the ground. It gets to the ground, rather than take it to the ground.
One would assume.
Are there wells drilled? I didn't hear anything about any water wells or anything like that.
No, there's no wells drilled.
There's no wells drilled within any of the turbine surroundings to use for coolants or anything like that.
No, the turbines, the impact on at the turbine itself, the foundation is excavated down about 10 feet, and but there are no wells or anything like that around it. And nothing's required. Water is not required at the turbines.
What would happen if oil did leak and get into the soils, which got into the ground surface and the water?
If we would have an environmental situation that has to be rectified in accordance with the EPA.
Had there been any impact on wells because of turbines?
I'm not aware of it, and I'm not quite sure how it would.
Again, I don't know.
No,
You're
I'm
right
not,
as well, so it's a concern.
right. In all of our existing projects, we have not seen any impact. Since the turbines are only, the foundations only go down about 10 feet, you're not getting anywhere near the aquifer.
Do you do the studies? I heard of all the studies that were done in the areas that these turbines are going. Have there been any studies after the turbines have been up with everything that you just talked about?
You mean our existing projects?
Yes.
Yes, we do. Those are the studies that Andrea had said. Originally, we were doing 3-year studies, and we've scaled them back to a single year of study.
And then my last question, and it may be a little bit off base with it, but are you familiar with Fermi Labs?
Sure.
And Fermi Labs is an extremely environmental conscious company.
I know they're a federally controlled agency, yeah.
So with Fermi Labs, they also study all of those things that I just mentioned. In addition to the habitat of butterflies and things like that. Why would, if you're that thorough in cutting edge of technology and environment, why wouldn't you be studying those types of issues when you're impacting the environment, such as Fermi Labs does?
Fermi Lab is a facility in suburban Chicago. I'm not quite sure what the context
What
is.
they do impacts the environment, and what you do impacts the environment. So they're taking it to the next level of studying all these things. The question would be, why would you then left?
As we do study that. As I think Andrea had maintained earlier at the beginning of our presentation, the various research work that we do and our ongoing efforts with our existing staff and any impacts that we observe on an ongoing basis.
But you don't address the horse, the cattle, the swine, the poultry, and the animals as well as like the butterfly and habitat like that, which they do. So the question is, why would we go that level?
Because there's not a problem. There's not a problem. What would you study if there's no problem?
Again, we don't know if there's a problem.
We do know there's not a problem because we have operating facilities.
Well, no, you stated that you weren't.
I think it's asked, right? We're gonna have to.
Okay, that's fine. I just want to make sure it's on the record. We would like a thorough study if this is going to be moving forward. Correct. And that's what I'm trying to accomplish. Thank you. That's all good.
Anyone else have questions?
Am I reading
I don't dispute the fact that you guys do survey after survey after survey.
Could you get a little closer to the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry. But Andrea, I think I heard you say that if there's a problem in one of the areas after these you come out and you conduct another survey. Is that correct?
I guess it depends on what kind of problem.
Well, if you have, I don't know, you said you do a survey for the site selection, and then after you do that, you come back a year later and do a survey in terms of the impact on the environment or on the wildlife or whatever.
Right.
Okay, my question is then, when you find out that you do have an impact on the wildlife in the second survey, what do you do then? Do you have another survey, or when do the surveys end and you do something about it?
Well, we use our surveys to help us guide us through siting and making operational decisions. And so when I mentioned that, what I was getting at was, if there was something that we weren't aware of that was in the project area, for example, a parcel of native prairie where there were protected butterfly species. If we identified that that was something that we hadn't been anticipating, and then we identified that that existed in the project area, then we would follow up and do additional surveys in that area.
So you do another survey?
So we do another survey to assess that, which will further inform whether or
then
not we
results
need to.
in what? Second survey, or the third survey, or how many surveys you're ending up doing?
Well, it helps inform our siting decisions and operational
But the
decisions.
site's already there and it's already up. What do you do then? I don't need to go into that point.
No, I think if we see a problem, there are means by which we can modify the operation of the turbine. I think a very good example of that both we and others in the industry have done has to do with bats. Early on, wind turbines operated and there were concerns of the mortality of some bats. Research has been done, much of which we participated in, to go ahead, as was recommended by the IDNR, to do curtailments at certain times of the year to mitigate any impacts that would have. Those are the sorts of things that would be done.
Because you can't pick these things up and move them, I understand.
Yeah, right. You would have to modify the operation.
Andrea also suggested that you don't want to impact pristine wildlife and you want to minimize impact. Well, that suggests to me that there is an impact. Could you kind of give me an idea of what it means to minimize impact? I mean, do you have parameters there? If you put one of these up 1,000 feet from a river, for example, and it has an impact, what do you mean by minimizing impact?
We want to minimize our disturbance to the sensitive wildlife species that are in the area.
But you do acknowledge that there is an impact.
There may be some impact, yes.
And some impact. You talk about carcass pickup, and you do that within 24 hours, or is that another survey you're doing to determine how many carcasses there are under these things?
That is actually, that's what our post-construction monitoring is.
Okay.
So we conduct that.
How do you do that? How do you conduct that? Especially if one of these things is built in the middle of a cornfield and the corn's 9 feet tall, how do you see where there's a carcass out there? Do you follow the buzzards up in the sky? No, you can't do that because they're all getting killed by the wind. So how do you find those carcasses and make that determination?
We will clear a plot below the turbine out to a certain distance. For example, if we had a 120 meter by 120 meter box centered on the turbine, we would clear all the crops around that area and reimburse the landowner for those crops. So we would take those out of commission for the year so that we can conduct carcass monitoring. The way that is conducted is we hire a consultant who basically walks back and forth beneath each turbine at certain intervals, and they're counting every single carcass that they see under the turbine. And then we basically add up all of the, they survey under a select number of turbines, typically around 30% of the fleet. And then we'll basically extrapolate from those numbers no impacted carcasses.
Thank you. You had a map up there of McLean County, and all the brown area that was there was all open farmland. There was just a little strip of river that ran through there. And you said that you didn't want to impact or minimize the impact on pristine wildlife in those areas. Why do you even bother to put those there? I mean, this is a big county. And you've got farmland as far as the eye can see here, everywhere you go. Why do you even bother to put them along there?
Well, we've cited 115 out of our 117 turbines, more than half a mile from the Mackinac River. We've also said that we would accept a counter recommendation to remove those 2 turbines as well. So we've actually committed to...
Those 2 turbines that are on the Mackinac River?
Correct.
You've agreed to remove those, is that correct?
What's that?
You agreed to remove those 2 turbines on the Mackinac River from your plan?
We've agreed to site them farther than half a mile from the river.
Okay. Then I think I'm probably going to skip that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Be easy on us, okay?
This is just the question part, right? Okay.
Go ahead, what's your name?
Right, Angelo, Angelo Caparella, Caparella. I reside at 907 South Bell Avenue in Normal. I just had a couple of questions. First off, you said that of the 7 IDNR recommendations, you are willing to follow 1 and 6, but as I read Exhibit 7, that's only if the county makes the recommendation, which is only if the ZBA makes the recommendation. That is, if they don't, the implication is that you would not be relocating those 2 turbines that you mentioned or doing the back work. So I guess I'm questioning the if in the clause. It sounds like it's contingent on the ZBA and the county requiring those 2 recommendations. Is that what the if means in the clause?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I had a couple of questions about how you determine setback distance, the 1,000 feet. I guess my first question is the 1,000-foot setback derived solely from the Indiana Bat study that you mentioned?
It's the Indiana Bat Summer Survey Guidelines, which is guidelines set forth by the Fish and Wildlife Service for conducting summer surveys for that species.
Right, so all other species, all the scores and scores of other species are sort of subsumed under that 1,000 foot that's been recommended for the sole species, the Indiana bat. Is that my understanding of how the 1,000 foot comes into the picture?
Yes, so the Fish and Wildlife Service has also said that this habitat for the Indiana bat is similar to the northern long-eared bat as well.
Right, but in terms of raptor nests and other things that you mentioned, the 1,000 foot. So the 1,000 foot is linked to the Indiana bat and the raptor nest, but everything's ultimately linked to just one species, the Indiana bat, for the 1,000 foot calculation as being the standard used.
That's, the 1,000 feet is what we use for, yes, for the bat species. The setbacks from, and that comes from the Fish and Wildlife Service guidelines. The 1,000 foot from raptor nest was really just our voluntary setback that we chose. It's not based on any recommendations. It was just a voluntary setback that we applied.
Okay, then I probably just got confused since it's the same number.
Right, right.
Okay, sorry about that. In terms of how you measure 1,000 feet, do you measure it from the tip of the killing part of the blade, or do you measure it from the center point of the turbine? So do you measure it from where the blade attaches to the turbine, or do you start the measurement from the actual tip of the turning blade?
So we measure that from the center of the turbine.
So it's not really 1,000 feet from the killing part of the turbine.
Though I will say that you did ask me this question earlier this week.
Right.
And
I know you didn't have a chance to get back to you.
And I looked at our setbacks that we have applied, and one turbine is actually set back more than 1,200 feet. So the additional 200 feet that accounts for the turbine blade that goes beyond the center is then accounted for.
Right, but the 1,000 foot number that's in the document is actually 1,000 feet minus the blade length in terms, it's the blade that kills, not the center. So you're really saying that, so I guess I'm wondering, and I'll have to check the document, when they talked about 1,000 feet for the Indiana bat, did they measure from the base of the blade or the tip of the blade?
So that number is actually, it's not a recommended setback by the Fish and Wildlife Service. It's being pulled from the definition of habitat. So
Right.
basically, the Fish and Wildlife Service is saying that the Indiana bat doesn't fly more than 1,000 feet from its foraging habitat. And so the wind industry kind of grabbed onto that and we said, okay, well that makes sense. If they're not going to fly more than 1,000 feet, then turbines, it's safe to put them beyond 1,000 feet. So that's where it wasn't actually a direct recommendation or a setback by the Fish and Wildlife Service. It was that we were saying, okay, this is the definition of habitat, and beyond that, that's not habitat.
Oh, I see. So what they're really saying is that the 1,000 feet should be measured from the edge of the habitat to the tip of the blade, which I know varies based on blade length depending on the thing. And it just sounds like the number isn't clear in the document. Am I correct that, in other words, they're concerned, 1,000 feet is the zone, which is the safe zone. The killing part is the tip, so I guess I still don't understand how that's calculated in terms of blade length. I'm just confused on that.
Yeah, like I said, that's just that 1,000 foot is a kind of definition of habitat. There's no actual description of kind of its relation to turbines in that document. It's describing how to conduct summer survey guidelines or conduct summer surveys. And so it's not a document that discusses the setbacks themselves.
Right, so setback isn't really related to the killing part of turbines. That's what I'm getting at.
There's a 1,000-foot setback criteria that we establish when we begin our layouts on this project.
Right.
No turbine tips enter into that 1,000-foot setback.
Oh, no turbine tips. And okay, that's all I need.
That's what it comes down to.
All right, thank you. Sorry for not being clear on my questions. And then finally, you mentioned in rejecting IDNR recommendation number 3 that instead you would have to be doing things anyway under the Army Corps of Engineers nationwide permit. Am I correct that that nationwide permit application does not allow for public comment?
I'm not entirely sure the answer to that.
I know in the past in this nationwide permit, I think number 6 is the one, that that's been, that, if I understand correctly, that doesn't allow for public comment. I don't know if it allows for county or other comment, because the Corps has those two categories, ones that allow, ones that don't. And I didn't know if your rationale was because you thought the public could still comment on number 3 if there were any concerns for the particular activity.
The public has the ability to comment on the development of the nationwide permits themselves, but not the issuance of each individual permit.
Exactly, yeah, that's what I wanted to get at. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I would like a point of clarification. It's been suggested that the killing part of the blade, that birds or raptors or others just get hit by the end of the blade, that is, what evidence is there for, because I assume that the birds fly through the circle and get hit not just by the tip but by the whole blade?
Well, I think the point is that the bat forages 1,000 feet from the riparian corridor. Our turbines are set, and if you look at the rotor of we've got, our blades stick out, or the rotor sticks out. The radius is about a little over 200 feet. None of the radius of the blades enters into that space. In other words, we are set back on the order of 1,200, 1,300, 1,500 feet from that corridor, so it's never going to interact with the species.
So while the chart up here was 1,000 feet, your actual setbacks are at least 1,200 feet from whatever habitat that you've identified.
Exactly, based on other criteria.
My name is Daniel Deneen, 2219 West Oakland Avenue, Wilmington. First, Mr. Parzik.
Could you spell your name, please?
D-E-N-E-E-N. First, Mr. Parzik, why did you wait until this afternoon to send your response to the IDNR recommendations to this board and to the public?
Because we received the letter from the IDNR on Tuesday evening. And we worked on the response, and as soon as we prepared the response, we sent it in.
What is the applicable county rule dealing with IDNR standards?
If I'm not mistaken, the zoning ordinance requires that we are in consultation with the IDNR.
Could it be that you have to provide credible evidence to overcome their recommendations?
I don't have it at my fingertips.
Mr. Dick, could you please recite the rule into the record?
This is under Article 6, dealing with wildlife and WEX, or wind farms. Required implementation of IDNR recommendations based on pre-siting study results unless credible evidence is presented against the recommendation.
As to number 2, why should Invenergy be allowed to follow industry standards instead of IDNR recommendations?
The recommendations of the IDNR, I mean, based on our history with these projects, we have found that, as Andrea had explained earlier, that based on what we have found thus far, is that 1 year is sufficient to give us indication of any impacts.
Why should your findings be given greater weight than the IDNR?
We're responding to the recommendations made and saying why we feel that based on why we come up with a means by which to satisfy that requirement based on history. So we have a history of working to investigate these problems with our operating farms.
But my question is, why should you be allowed to determine that and not IDNR?
We've responded accordingly based on our history in this area.
Excuse me, point of order, Mr. Dick. Are we as the board required to follow either? Are we required to follow anybody's standards other than our own in this respect? We have recommendations from IDNR. We can follow them. We have comments and recommendations from the applicant. And we have comment, we'll probably possibly get comment from the public. To what extent are we required to follow any of these other than what is stated in our guidelines?
My opinion is that you were required to determine whether the applicant is giving credible evidence that they're complying with those recommendations.
Yes. Okay. So for the record, we've had a whole litany of stipulations we've done in these things, and so we may actually set a higher standard should we want to, and that's totally within our prerogative, isn't it?
Yes.
Thank you.
There's a lot of landowners and people in the ag industry here. Your number 5 are steep, sloped, straight ditches, a proper agricultural practice in McLean County or prime farmland.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Would you please look at number 5 in your letter, where you describe steep, sloped, straight ditches?
Okay?
What do you mean by that, or was it written by a lawyer or somebody else?
What I'm saying here is that that many of the ditches, many of the various streams in the area have been modified to accommodate agriculture, and they're no longer in their natural condition.
Would you Are you describing, though, didn't you describe a lot of them as being a steep slope?
Well, the steep slope, my point there is that it says to steep ditches flowing in straight lines, in other words, that they've been modified to accommodate agriculture.
Did you ever personally go out and look at anything beyond a waterway that might be that way? Have you looked at the natural streams, the ones that do have perennial water, or is that just something you put down to satisfy number 5?
It says here that many, I didn't say that all of them are.
Okay. Does the United States Department of Agriculture pay farmers to keep from having steep slopes on their creeks and even waterways?
I don't know.
Okay. So, we'll give you one last chance. What credible evidence do you have to oppose Standard 5?
The question is, what does it achieve?
No, the question is to you. You are not to question the people on the stand. The question is to you as the representative.
Right.
What the county board and the zoning board of appeals is supposed to ascertain if there's credible evidence for your refusal to follow IDNR recommendation number 5. The question is not, why am I asking that question? So please answer the question.
So the answer to the question is the basis that the letter, it's not all laid out here. The letter.
Well, where is the evidence then?
Can you let me finish, please? Okay. So the letter that we received from IDNR indicates that there's a desire to stay 500 feet back from all perennial streams based on the possibility that vibrations would impact the aquatic life in those streams. Our comment is that 500, there is no basis for that 500 feet based on existing information in the public purview that turbines have vibrations and impact aquatic life in streams.
Okay. Did you review the procedural rules that they handed out to the general public?
I'm sorry, what's your point?
Once again, you are not to ask me questions. My question is, did you read them and review them?
What you have in your hands? I do not have what you have in your hands.
Does this state that you are not to make vague and unsupported testimony?
What's your point?
What credible evidence do you have to support number 5 instead of spouting out like there is evidence out there somewhere?
No, my comment was that there is no evidence that indicates that there is a need to stay 500 feet from a stream because of any impacts that turbines would have on a aquatic life.
Okay, let's get back to the question framed in the rules of the county board. What credible evidence?
I think he's answered.
I think I've answered it.
Ability. I think we got to move on.
I think you have your answer.
Would anyone else want to ask questions?
Amy, so in number 1, were you going to slow the turbine speed during the migratory season? Is that for all turbines or just certain turbines that have been specified?
It's for all turbines.
Okay, second question is, are you guys responsible for the floodplain thing too? Is that all under your environmental manager role? The floodplain maps?
We are, with respect to what? I'm sorry, with respect to what?
So, when I was looking at the floodplain maps that are in the application, it looks like there are 2 turbines, and I didn't look at all of them, just ones in my area. 2 of them that are like right on the edge of the floodplain, so I didn't know if there was a rule in the environmental studies that say you're supposed to stay off floodplains.
There's no requirement that we have to stay outside of the floodplain. We do it even if it's right on the edge, because that is the limit of the 100-year floodplain. We do it to maintain the integrity of our facilities. We don't want them in a floodplain. They may
So
be on the edge.
there's no requirement to stay out of a floodplain.
That's correct.
This is just informational.
It's the, yes.
Okay. Yes.
David Hill, 29725.
You might have to say it again, he was doing something else. If you don't mind.
Multitasking gets you in trouble. Okay. David Hill.
Pardon?
Hill.
David Hill,
Yes.
need address?
29725 East 2100 North Road. That's a Colfax address. If I understood the testimony correctly, there's 117 sites. Only 2 of them are within half a mile of the river, the Mackinac. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I guess I'm considering the recommendation to be at least a half a mile out. What would cause you to feel that those 2 sites were absolutely essential for you to choose as sites to erect?
Well, there is no requirement for a half mile that we would use in our evaluation of laying the project out.
I understand that. What would cause you, though, to consider that the recommendation should need to apply, that that's such a crucial site that you're going to pick it in spite of the recommendation?
The recommendation by the IDNR is made to the county. Okay, it's not made to us. We're responding to what is possible, what we can do with respect to those recommendations.
You're aware that this is a recommendation that's come. My question to you is, knowing this, and it's only 2 sites, what would make you think that those 2 sites were essential, that you had to choose those over other sites? Because you're not picking all 117, you're only picking 100.
And I'm not saying that we are. Right?
Thank you.
I think Mr. Dick has a clarification.
I wanted to ask, where did you notify us that all turbines would be a half mile from the Mackinac River?
In our response to number 6, we said that the county makes that recommendation, and we'd be willing to. Second sentence of our response says that NWAC is willing to site all turbines more than 1/2 mile from the Mackinac River. The county makes its recommendation.
Is there any more questions? One more, come on.
I'd like to make one other clarification. Under our ordinance, the WEX located in a special flood hazard area or wetland shall comply with the requirements of the floodplain overlay district. So it's very unlikely that you'd be turbine in a floodplain.
Good evening. My name is Yale Young. Just like the college, forklift, or lock. Yale. Y-A-L-E. I reside at 27297 East 2250 North Road in Lexington. My wife and I purchased a short 40 acres, approximately in 2012, and we have, within that, we reside in about 55 acres of mine and the neighbor to the south of continuous timber ground.
This is just for questions.
Okay, I'm getting there. So with that being said, I heard a couple quotes up here, and I want to have a definition of a high-quality perennial stream.
literature that we use in our response.
You did. Mr. Kevin, I'm going to butcher his last name, said about nothing building in high-quality streams and rivers. And you also said we recommend 1,000 feet from the Mackinac River and creeks because of the habitat. And you said that was a high-quality perennial stream. So I would like a definition of a high-quality perennial stream.
I think this is when you were talking about boring under and not disturbing any of the streams, is what he was talking about when he brought that up.
That's what a definition of it.
I apologize if I was unclear there. We would be boring, we bore under all streams, not necessarily a high-quality stream.
But my point being to this, and getting into this number 5 on these setbacks, you know, I heard that about the ditches in number 5, but what's the definition? Because in your writing, you say they're straight and steep, correct? That's
right.
Writing in number 5.
Right.
I own a half mile of Patton Creek, and you guys are more than welcome to come walk it. There's nothing straight about that. And right across the road in the drainage ditch, it does get straight. So where do we define that from a habitat to a drainage ditch?
The term high quality was actually used in the letter from the IDNR in describing the Mackinac River and the confluence with the creek. So that's where high quality came from. We make the comment that many of the rivers or the creeks in the project area are straight, but it's just part of our discussion about the fact that we do not see a need for a 500-foot setback based on the IDNR's concerns with regard to vibration from turbines impacting aquatic life.
My concern is number 65, the turbine number 65, is roughly 100 to 200 feet from Patton Creek. And there's also CRP ground on both sides of that, and that acts as habitat as well. So that's why I was just trying to qualify what that is.
I can't speak to where that turbine is located. We could investigate where it is.
It's 800 feet from my property line, it's 1,000 feet from my forest, and it's 1,500 feet from my house.
Okay, but I would have to look at what the creek impact is.
So I guess one last thing is I'd like to recommend number 5, setback for the perennial streams, and for my IDNR recommendations to you, the county board. Thank you.
I think for the record, isn't a perennial stream one that runs all year round? There's some technical definition in somewhere. I think in the notes that give the definition of a perennial stream versus an intermittent stream. I think there's another scale down on that.
How about the high quality part?
Yeah, they all right up this fall. And the high quality wasn't part of recommendation number 5. It was Department recommends that the county consider imposing a requirement for the applicant to avoid siting turbines within 500 feet of a perennial stream. And I don't see anything concerning vibrations there either. I think it might have been habitat or something else. I don't know. The vibrations were something that came in from testimony, and it might be from one of the others. So
So we may need to clarify which are the perennial streams and how far they go up.
I think we might get an answer from there.
Okay, so I was just reading the cliff notes. Oh, Spartans, my corrections were over.
Okay. Anyone else have questions? I think we are ready for your next witness, if that's the case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next witness is Mr. David Loomis, and he's going to testify concerning the economic impacts of the project. And again, he has a PowerPoint to go along with with his testimony, and he needs to be sworn in.
Okay, do you solemnly swear that the testimony you give in this case now and hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Better state your name and address for the record.
Name is David Loomis. My address is 2705 Colby Court, Bloomington.
You won't mind getting a little closer to the mic, I'm already here.
Sure.
Do you need the spelling of his name?
Oh, we can have that.
Well, good evening. I know it's been a long evening so far, and it doesn't look like we have copies of my PowerPoint presentation. The